Hello, Waterloo Region. You're listening to Meet the Candidate on CKMS-FM 102.7 Radio Waterloo. My name is Bob Jonkman. In this episode, we meet Kathleen Dueck, the United Party candidate for Kitchener South Hespeler. In Meet the Candidates, Radio Waterloo provides 25 minutes of free airtime to the Waterloo Region candidates running in the 2025 federal election. This is not an interview, but 25 minutes of unstructured time. Candidates could tell you about their platform, the local Waterloo Region issues they'll be tackling, why they're running, or what they do outside of politics. Note that the views expressed are not necessarily those of the Radio Waterloo Board of Directors, volunteers, sponsors, or advertisers. Now, let's meet the candidate, Kathleen Dueck, who's accompanied by Margo Dyck, the United Party candidate for Kitchener Centre.
Good morning, KW, and thank you, CKMS 102.7 FM, for this great opportunity. My name is Kathleen Dueck, and I am the United Party candidate for Kitchener South Hespeler.
And I'm Margo Dyck, the United Party candidate for Kitchener Centre.
We appeared on this show together 2 weeks ago to explain a lot about the United Party. We want to expand slightly further on how many candidates within the United Party got here. We are critical thinkers. We saw the double standard and gaps in the mainstream narrative within our country. As we go through some questions that other candidates across Canada have been asked during debates, we will surface some of the gaps in the narrative. Let's start with some neuroscience. How do you build a new neural pathway? With consistent repetition and mindful attention. You have to frequently feed your mind the same thing and be concentrated on it. What is feeding the mind of Canadians consistently and grabbing their attention?
As I was meeting constituents in the past few weeks, if I heard activity in someone's home, most of the time it was a news channel, and the narrative, if I could hear it, was always the same. Anytime I have watched the news, it is fear-inducing, negative, and divisive. Neuroscience also tells us that when someone is afraid, they are more likely to comply under instruction. Building on that, as we mentioned last time, we are hearing a lot about a tariff war, violence in the Middle East, and a war in the Ukraine. But we are currently having a problem in Parliament. It is full of public servants that have not been in session for months on end. We're hearing about travesties across the globe while ignoring what's happening in our own country. This is a gap in the narrative. We're being told to fear events and issues that are way bigger than us, while not holding our own government accountable to do their proper job. I have seen and experienced this gap in narrative. I went to the trucker convoy at the beginning of 2022. The media made it out to be a Nazi and terrorist occupation. My experience on the ground was completely different. The streets were clean. There was free food being given out to anyone walking by. The joy was tangible. There were different people of the Judeo-Christian faith dancing, playing music, preaching, or singing. There were many families with young children there. It felt like one big happy family, like there was hope in Canada again. It was truly a patriotic experience. A friend of ours was there with his truck and said there was an angry person not affiliated with the convoy that was throwing eggs at his truck and yelling inappropriate things to the truckers. She actually did damage to our friend's truck, but we didn't hear that story. The Freedom Convoy was a movement of patriotic Canadians advocating for themselves and their families in a constitutional manner with peaceful protesting.
On the flip side, we know about protests in Canada happening about an issue in the Middle East, which have protesters breaking windows with baseball bats while police officers stand by. I'm seeing a gap in the narrative.
Moving on to our young people. We have laws to protect them from purchasing alcohol too young, or joining the military too young, or even voting before they are adults. But we have legislated children consenting to an irreversible surgery and criminalized parents trying to advise them otherwise. It is an inalienable right to have children and raise them up in the way they should go.
So, how do you build a new neural pathway? With consistent repetition and mindful attention. When someone hosts fear, they are more likely to comply under direction. We need to question what we are being told repeatedly. Why is there so much induction of fear, and why are we captivated by? What are we captivated by? Then we need to recognize the impact that it is having on us and our families and our society. Then we need to look at the big picture.
All right, so on to some debate questions. How do you feel about Trump tariffs?
We've been asked to clean up our border. That's a legitimate nationwide security threat, including copious amounts of illegal drug and child trafficking and foreign interference that must be cleaned up along our border. To enhance tariffs instead of dealing with organized crime is really to support organized crime and have hardworking Canadians suffer the implications. He is asking us to clean up crime. We want security for Canadians, and we want to work with powerful, safety-focused neighbors. What will your party do to protect agricultural land and protect Canadian food sovereignty?
We recognize that farmers are producers, not polluters. Farmland contributes significantly to the resource-rich nation that we are. We want to simplify agricultural regulations to protect farmers from excessive government intervention, allowing them to focus on feeding Canadians and exporting to global markets. What are the United Party's thoughts on the increasing cost of living?
If we built up our economy, encouraged each province to stand on its own economically, and removed unnecessary taxes, we can see an over 50% decrease in taxes that Canadians are currently paying. The carbon tax is penalizing and unfruitful. The United Party would revoke all taxpayer-funded benefits for illegal immigrants, including health care and social assistance. Instead of trying to manage increasingly difficult circumstances, the United Party sees ways to create circumstances of possibility and hope. What does Indigenous reconciliation mean to you?
It means knowing the injustices that are going on today, rather than using the past and the story of an Indigenous person for political gain. Every child does matter. Did you know that during the emergence of that movement, over 200 churches in Canada were burned? Is that in the name of justice? Do Christians feel justice knowing that? There are still Indigenous children being targeted today, but the narrative is different than the one we're being mass-fed. If you want to know what the Indigenous community is actually facing today, please look up J.D. Lemens on the National Citizens Inquiry. It is a wake-up call from an Indigenous man telling his witness account. Consumer carbon pricing has been cut. What do you say to constituents that believe environmental issues should be a top priority?
Well, have we really eliminated carbon taxing for the consumer? Corporate taxes are still in place, so won't that be passed on to the consumer? It sounds good at first, but when you think about it, we are still paying carbon taxes, just indirectly. We are constantly being told to fear for the planet. When you ask a farmer what carbon does, they will tell you it makes things grow. We are already a net zero country. We have amazing natural resources that have been regulated to the point of economic harm. We would remove detrimental regulations on natural resource development. It is possible to build a strong economy with Canada's natural resources while respecting the earth. So what is the United Party's take on national defense and Canada's role in NATO?
Currently, we are spending 1.3% of our GDP on military. NATO recommends to spend 2%. The United Party would spend up to 3% and ensure that the armed forces are made up of Canadian citizens. We would expand recruitment and training programs to increase military personnel levels, ensuring the CAF is fully staffed and combat ready. The CAF has faced severe recruitment shortages, with the Army 10,000 troops below its target. We will launch a national recruitment campaign and increase incentives for service members. Furthermore, our CF-18 fighter jets, in service since the 1980s, are long overdue for replacement. We have an amazing landscape and people to protect. Currently, our Army is made up primarily of non-citizens. It is the role of the Army to protect Canadians, so it is in the interest of the individual Canadian to be protected by their fellow citizens. We also need to protect the country as a whole from foreign interference. Kathy, how will the United Party address housing costs?
We will incentivize strong families with lower mortgage interest rates and loan forgiveness in certain circumstances. Allocate land for affordable housing specifically designed for families. Support stay-at-home parents with tax breaks and expand income splitting to ensure families with one income carrier are not unfairly taxed at higher rates. It is also important here to talk about responsible immigration, ensuring that Canadian citizens are giving housing priority over illegal immigrants and residents with expired visas. We must end mass migration quotas and replace them with a skills-based point system, prioritizing highly skilled workers who integrate successfully. What will the United Party do for local sector and small businesses?
Well, Kitchener is strong in tech, innovation, and education. The United Party wants to see each province stand on its own 2 feet. In recent decades, Alberta has paid over $1 trillion in equalization payments to Quebec and Ontario. This is not sustainable, unifying, or efficient. We want to see our abundant natural resources and human capital within Ontario building a stronger Ontario. The United Party would remove capital gains taxes on new energy projects to spur development and increase private sector involvement in growing Canada's resource sector, and we would cut bureaucratic red tape to boost certain industries. With innovation in our corner, we are not limited in possibility. How would the United Party handle border protection?
Well, I recently heard from a trucker who frequently crosses the border into the States that our Canadian border process is a joke among the truckers. On the other hand, the American border officers scrutinize each trucker coming into their country carefully and know a great deal about them before they begin to talk to them. So we would increase funding and staffing for the Canada Border Services Agency to ensure strict enforcement of immigration laws and implement advanced surveillance technology at all border crossings, including drones, motion sensors, and biometric verification. We would deploy a specialized border protection task force to prevent illegal crossings and human trafficking. We will inspect containers in Canadian ports more stringently. What is the United Party's take on the current healthcare system and admitting internationally trained practitioners?
We all know there is a delay with healthcare for various reasons. We should be discussing more than just policy. Did you know that since the end of 2020 until mid-2022, 80 Canadian medical doctors have died? We have to ask why. These doctors were not at the end of their natural life. Many of them were young as 26. I have heard from many constituents on both sides of the relationship that patient-practitioner relations are increasingly hostile, especially in the past 5 years. We must remove unelected global entities like the World Health Organization from making healthcare a money-making industry that wants to control the body autonomy of Canadians. Regarding international practitioners, we would limit post-graduation work permits to only the most highly skilled graduates in fields where Canada faces labor shortages. We must prioritize Canadian job market needs. How does the United Party support women?
We would support stay-at-home parents with tax breaks and expand income splitting to ensure families with one income earner are not unfairly taxed at higher rates. This way, mothers do not have to choose between having a family and maintaining a proper lifestyle. We would expand funding for crisis pregnancy centers, for housing, financial aid, and parenting support programs for mothers who choose life. We would legally prohibit biological males from competing in female sports at all levels. We would mandate the female bathrooms, changing rooms, and shelters be protected as biological female-only spaces. Introduce strict penalties for institutions that allow men into female-only areas. We would remove biological males from female prisons. Finally, we would repeal Bill C-4 because it is an attack against women.
How have the last 9 years of the current government impacted us?
The last 9 years have put Canadians under confusion and control of global entities that are non-elected, non-Canadian authoritarian powers that feed the fear of Canadians. Our government leadership has ignored the call of peaceful protesting Canadians asking for a conversation, while a few days later denouncing a foreign government doing the same thing to their own citizens. This government has paid billions to media sources that create propaganda rather than report news. Ideology is not leadership. Canadians have experienced the increasing dismantling of the family and economic independence, which is what builds strong communities. Fear is no way to lead people. The United Party stands on principle and truth and carries a message of hope and prosperity.
And regarding protecting the Arctic, there is a Chinese and Russian presence there, and the United Party would increase the Canadian presence there. Kathy, would you tell us about the Westminster Act?
Well, the Westminster Act was passed in British Parliament in 1931. It severed the connection of the Crown to the colony of Canada. Yes, it moved the sovereignty of the Crown from Britain to the people of Canada, and not the government of Canada. It was the people. It contained an instruction that sovereignty would have legislative effect through provincial legislatures, and the provincial legislatures would define the federal state. This was an amazing freedom that was actually extended to us nearly 100 years ago, yet seems to have been ignored by our federal government, who continue to hang the crown over Canada. What would happen if the provinces actually acted on their freedoms? That seems to be a topic that is well worth discussing.
Mm-hmm. I have heard from many constituents that they are no longer interested in politics because they don't trust politicians and don't care for voting. The United Party is looking to redeem that. We are not career politicians, and we are in this because we love our country and want to fight for our country. What do you think a common sense government should look like?
Common sense. Well, are tariffs common sense? Think about it. Is a weak border and a weak military with non-Canadian servicemen common sense? Is failing to develop our natural resources common sense? Is allowing the current government to fund mainstream media common sense? Is funding illegal immigrants common sense? Is ignoring organized crime common sense? So many questions we should be asking.
Thanks, Kathy. In closing, facts are not enough. Kitchener, you are critical thinkers, and we have named some gaps in the narrative this morning. I encourage you to ask the questions that you're being told you can't ask. You will glean more there. Canada is in a crisis of meaning and identity. There is more at stake than policies, and we are having a bigger conversation than just policies. If you feel like you can't trust politicians anymore, let the United Party do something new for your riding. We are not career politicians. We are the voice of a growing movement of sovereignty, truth, and common sense. The momentum is beginning, and it will only grow from here. We need to connect back to the value system that built this country, the supremacy of God and the rule of law. This is where freedom comes from. The value system recognizes a God who gives people the choice to accept or reject, and also builds the strongest nations across the world. The government is here to serve Canadians, not to incite fear and control. Canada could once again be one of the most wealthy, resilient, and beautiful countries in the world. If you want to learn more, you can go to unitedpartyofcanada.ca. The policies on the website are clear and straightforward, which you will also find is unique in this arena.
Okay. Well, we have time for some extra questions.
All right.
So, do you support new oil and gas projects?
The United Party understands that oil and gas are essential to a prosperous Canada. And as we mentioned earlier, we're already a net zero country, and there are ways to do this in a clean manner that also respects the earth. We would cancel the net zero agenda and remove emission caps. We would eliminate federal emission reduction targets and carbon taxes that drive up energy costs for Canadians and destroy competitiveness. We would expand pipelines and energy infrastructure, supporting a cross-Canada energy corridor to efficiently transport oil, gas, and electricity from production centres to consumers and export terminals. We would lower corporate tax rates to match or undercut the US and global competitors, making Canada an attractive destination for investment in energy, mining, and manufacturing. Can you speak more to Arctic development, Kathy?
Okay, we need to expand our resource extraction in the north. Establish a national Arctic development strategy to expand the oil, gas, and mineral extraction in the Canadian Arctic. Russia has aggressively expanded its Arctic oil and gas production and mineral extraction in the Canadian Arctic. So in wrap-up, we need to assert sovereignty over this as well as developing those natural resources for ourselves.
You've been listening to Kathleen Dueck, the United Party candidate for Kitchener South Hespeler on Meet the Candidate. The views expressed were those of the candidate, not necessarily those of the Radio Waterloo Board of Directors, volunteers, sponsors, or advertisers. All Waterloo Region candidates were invited to meet the candidate, but some candidates have declined to appear on the radio, and some have not responded at all. Remember, the election is on Monday, the 28th of April. Show notes, podcast, and video will be available shortly on the Radio Waterloo website at radiowaterloo.ca/MTC. This show is produced by me, Bob Jonkman, in the studios of CKMS-FM. The theme music is Falling Sky by Jason Shaw of Audionautics.com and used under Creative Commons Attribution Only license.